For the first time since the 2022 World Cup, the U.S. men's national team have some games that matter. In March, there will be two fixtures, an away game against Grenada and a home game against El Salvador for the CONCACAF Nations League. Now, while these games on their face might not be the most interesting thing in the world for U.S. men's national team fans, I think they're the subplot to the main plot that is the ongoing what in the world is going on between the Reinas and Greg Berhalter and U.S. Soccer and the general manager position and the sporting director position and just what in the world is happening in U.S. Soccer. To that extent, we got an update with the release of the U.S. Soccer investigation into the Gio Reyna, Greg Berhalter, Claudio Reyna, Daniel Reyna scandal. The report does not favor the Reinas, I don't think, in any way. It paints Claudio particularly in a pretty bad light, and it has some things included in it that may make him getting a job in soccer in the future, an executive position in soccer, difficult, considering some of the comments that he made about female referees in particular. I think a lot of fans were looking for just a lot of lurid details in the report, and while there were certainly some, I think the main extent of the report was to show that U.S. Soccer did not do anything wrong whenever it came to their learning about the domestic violence incident with Greg Berhalter, looking into whether he repeated any of that domestic violence while he was the coach of the U.S. men's national team or even after the incident, and whether or not U.S. Soccer did anything wrong in the hiring process for Greg Berhalter. What actually happened between the Berhalters and the Reinas was kind of the subplot for that. This was really all about legal liability. However, what this sets up is just a really, really interesting discussion about the U.S. men's national team, about the future head coach, about the future GM and sporting director for the U.S. men's national team, and about where Gio Reyna fits in. Because after all this, he is one of, if not the most talented player on the team. He's a very young player with a very bright future ahead, both for his club career and for the U.S. men's national team. We know that he will be reintegrated into this team at some point. The question is when. The question is it going to be in March? That is one of the most interesting discussions coming from this. But it's not the only one. There are several players who are maybe shouldn't be included in this roster. We're going to get into what I think interim head coach Anthony Hudson is going to do. All that and more on this episode of the Yank Report. What's up? My name is Sam. This is the Yank Report, a show all about American soccer, and we've got some interesting American soccer going on right now. If you're into that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. If you want to directly support the channel, you can become a member. Shout out to my Tier 2 members. Now, before we get into the roster for March, let's hear a word from this week's sponsor. BetOnline remains your #1 source for all sports betting this season. Everything from pro and college basketball to UFC and MMA and more. Always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable, BetOnline is truly the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use promo code BELIEVE to receive your rewards. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Now, before we get into the actual roster, I think the bigger question at hand, and the question that's being debated so much among U.S. men's national team circles, is what is Anthony Hudson going to do with this roster? Is he going to bring in the A-team, the best players available, to see what they can do in this Nations League? Is he going to sit out some players who are maybe returning from injury or are in tough relegation battles with their team and give more opportunities to younger players? Is it going to be a search for maybe dual internationals or something like that? What exactly is he going to do? I've given this a lot of thought. To me, I think whenever you look at just the entire U.S. men's national team system and all the administrators involved, normally there would be people involved looking towards the future. I think that's what a lot of us fans are doing. I mean, we're invested. We're going to be here in the 2026 World Cup and beyond. We're going to be with this team for a long time. So it's okay for us to invest in the future of this national team. However, whenever you look around with the administration of the U.S. men's national team, there's nobody here who's going to be in it for the long haul. The guy who's in charge right now is the interim manager. And though I think a lot of us believe he probably isn't going to be the future manager of the national team, he's still kind of gunning for that position. And if he doesn't get that position, I mean, his tenure as the interim head coach of the U.S. men's national team is going to go a long way towards securing his next position. So what he does with these games, I think for him personally is very important. So I think the only guy whose opinion matters in this situation is very invested in what happens with this national team over the next few months. The national team is broken right now. They've been enthralled in scandal. It's not a good situation to be in. So I think Anthony Hudson sees himself as having an opportunity to build bridges, to put things back together, and hopefully put together a group on the field that maybe he could fix the U.S. men's national team, which would go a long way towards securing a future head coaching position for him in the future. Now, let's get to the matter at hand. Let's start with the goalkeepers. The three goalkeepers I have selected are Matt Turner, Zach Steffen, and Ethan Horvath. These are all guys that have been a big part of the U.S. men's national team goalkeeper picture for the entire cycle now. Sean Johnson and Gaga Slonina are the two other names out there that might be in the mix for this. Sean Johnson was part of the World Cup squad, but he's 33 years old. He just got the move to Toronto FC. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be a huge part of the national team moving forward. He is that veteran presence in the locker room. Does the team need that right now? The player on the other side of the age scale here would be Gaga Slonina. Gaga actually got his move to Chelsea and is participating with them at the moment. So is now the time to bring him into the national team and get him integrated, or is it better for him to stay with his club at Chelsea? Is he even ready for this type of situation? Is he better right now in this moment than Zach Steffen or Ethan Horvath? I don't know. It's an interesting question. At the fullback position, I have a lot of turnover here. I went with Serginho Dest, Anthony Robinson, Joe Scally, and Kevin Paredes. And I think Serginho Dest and Anthony Robinson are pretty locked in at this point. Now, Serginho Dest, I feel like he's just not quite been the player that he was maybe a year ago. Just ever since things started going south for him at Barcelona, he's kind of struggled here and there. He's had his good games and his bad games. Anthony Robinson seems to really be coming into form and really reaching the prime of his career at the moment. I think he's just the locked-in left back for the U.S. men's national team. Speaking of left backs, we know that left back in the previous cycle was just one of the really tough positions for the U.S. men's national team. We never really found that backup. We tried out a whole handful of guys. That's why I think bringing in Kevin Paredes at this point might be an interesting move. He's getting regular minutes in the Bundesliga. He's not like a nailed down starter or anything for his team, but he is seeing action, and he's a player that I've always really enjoyed ever since his days at DC United. Now, he has been playing left wing back, and he's been playing some left wing, right wing, kind of picking up minutes in different locations. But considering that left back is such a position of need and he can fill in that role, I'd be very curious to see what he looks like in that position. Can this be a spot where Kevin Paredes can earn that position on this team? Joe Scally would be the fourth guy. He would be the backup right back. Now, that would mean he is overcoming a handful of guys who were picked ahead of him throughout World Cup qualifying, including Reggie Cannon, Shaq Moore, and DeAndre Yedlin. Now, those three guys are just not very exciting players for me at the moment. Whenever I project forward for the 2026 World Cup, I just don't see any of those guys really being included. I think now's the time to move forward with Joe Scally, who is still getting regular minutes in the Bundesliga. I think he's just got more upside, and there's just a whole lot of reasons to bring Scally ahead of those other guys. At center back, I'm taking five guys. I've got Walker Zimmerman, Chris Richards, Tim Ream, Cameron Carter-Vickers, and Miles Robinson. Now, an argument can certainly be made whenever it comes to Tim Ream and Walker Zimmerman about, are they too old for the national team at this point? Are they going to be involved in 2026? Should we be moving on for them? I think for those two players in particular, I think that they just bring so much leadership and experience that, particularly in a window where there's just so much going on with this national team, I think that they would be good players to have in the locker room for this particular group at this particular time. I do believe that they're going to get moved on from throughout this particular World Cup cycle. I was going to say World Cup qualifying. There's no World Cup qualifying for 2026 for the U.S. men's national team. We've already qualified. Good job, everyone. The really interesting player here is going to be Chris Richards. He's the one that I think everybody's looking at that really should have been for the U.S. World Cup team in 2022, but was injured for a big part of World Cup qualifying in the actual World Cup. He's hopefully that guy who's going to be the first, really, truly great world-class center back for the U.S. men's national team, hopefully by 2026. He's had some promising games for Crystal Palace so far in the Premier League. Speaking of promising games, I think Cameron Carter-Vickers came on real late as a player for the U.S. men's national team. A lot of folks wanted him to be integrated a lot sooner. I think he offers a pretty strong floor for the center back position for the U.S. There's some other guys floating out there that you can make arguments for. John Brooks is certainly one of them. John Brooks was seen as a player that was isolated and just was not one of Greg Berhalter's players throughout the 2022 cycle. You could also make an argument that he just didn't have a lot of playing time after he left the Bundesliga. Well, he's back in the Bundesliga now, and he's getting minutes for his club team. So it is possible that John Brooks could be brought in. There's also Austin Trusty, who's been putting together some good performances in the championship, who is a player that a lot of people want to see with the national team. I wouldn't be upset if you saw potentially Austin Trusty over Miles Robinson or something like that. Miles Robinson is just a player that he had a really good 2022 World Cup cycle. The injury to Miles Robinson really set off a chain reaction that really put the center back position for the U.S. men's national team in a difficult position. I think if Miles Robinson is healthy throughout the cycle and throughout the World Cup, we feel so much better about the center back position heading into the World Cup. I don't know that Miles Robinson necessarily has the ceiling of him going to be the future world-class center back or anything like that, but I think he's a good athletic center back that is able to cover a lot of ground and really sets a solid floor for what the center back position could be for the U.S. men's national team moving forward. At the defensive midfielder position, it is still Tyler Adams and Kellyn Acosta. Now, a very interesting question is, will Tyler Adams be in this group? There's a lot of people out there who are saying that Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie should be left with Leeds because of the relegation battle that they're going for. Does Tyler have anything to prove with this U.S. men's national team? Do we necessarily need Tyler Adams to beat Grenada and El Salvador? I don't think so. It could be an opportunity to see other players. However, what other players are out there to see? I mean, there's Aiden Morris, who came in for the January camp, who was, I don't know, he was okay, I guess. I don't know. Kellyn Acosta is certainly the incumbent backup defensive midfielder. We could see him there. It could be a time where maybe Anthony Hudson tries something out, like a double pivot or something else like that, and we kind of eliminate the need for this Tyler Adams position. We'll see moving forward, but it is an interesting discussion, and it's hard to really name who is going to be the next defensive midfielder for the U.S. men's national team, because I don't think that player has revealed themselves at this point in time. Now, I think the more interesting discussion would be the advanced midfielders. For those, I have Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Luca De La Torre, Brendan Aronson, and Eric Williamson. Now, as I just discussed with Tyler Adams, you could make the same case for Weston McKennie and potentially even Brendan Aronson as players that, do they absolutely need to be in this camp? Are they better served to be staying with their club team who is fighting for their relegation spot right now? It's an interesting discussion, and I certainly see some merits on both sides of the argument. I've read a few people's responses who feel like it's so important for these players to be together, to build chemistry, to build camaraderie as we head towards 2026. Though at the same time, I mean, I see all the time transfers come in and out of clubs and fairly quickly are able to put it together and build that chemistry and that camaraderie. And whenever you consider that these three guys, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, and Brendan Aronson, are playing together with their club team, I mean, how much chemistry do they really need to build? Especially whenever you consider, once again, that we're playing under an interim manager and we don't necessarily know what the future of this team was going to be, what the future system will look like, how this team is going to play in the future once the new manager is named. There's certainly a lot of reasons to say, maybe Weston stays with his club team. Now, that opens up a lot of opportunities for other players, particularly, I think, Luca De La Torre, who is having a pretty strong season after, let's say, prior to the World Cup, his move to Celta Vigo was less than impressive. He wasn't getting very many minutes. He got injured prior to the World Cup. He was carrying an injury as we entered the World Cup, probably contributed to him not getting very many minutes during the World Cup, though that's also its own debate. Luca De La Torre seems to be coming into his own with Celta Vigo a little bit, and I would like to see him kind of running the show with this national team for these two games. Now, of course, the competition is not going to be that great, and Luca will probably look a lot more impressive in these games than he might otherwise. That goes for a lot of these players. If we're introducing new players, they're probably going to look pretty good against Grenada, so take that with a grain of salt. But at the same time, an opportunity for Luca to run the show. I also have, we're still searching for like solidifying that 8 position. We're still searching for more guys to come in and provide depth. There's a handful of names out there, some interesting names. I think Eric Williamson is probably top of that list for me, but there's also Paxton Pomykal, who didn't have a very good January camp showing, but has started the season well with with FC Dallas. You've got Tim Tillman. You've got Malik Tillman. Tim Tillman just made the transfer to LAFC and has started pretty hot for them as well. Seems like a pretty good floor-setting midfielder. Malik Tillman probably has a little bit more upside than his brother, a player that can fill in at multiple roles in the attack. He would be an interesting player to bring in this particular spot, just depending on which players we bring in. I think all those guys make interesting cases. Now, moving on to the winger position, we've got some interesting stuff happening here. I just went ahead and called the strongest group that I could, which was Tim Weah, Christian Pulisic, Gio Reyna, and freshly minted U.S. men's national team player Alejandro Zendejas. Zendejas announced today, like right before I started recording this video, that he would be a U.S. men's national team player in the future. Now, this has some interesting things happening here. Looking at the two depth charts for the two national teams, Mexico and the U.S., I would have thought Zendejas went with Mexico. I feel like whenever you consider the age of Tecatito Corona and some of the backups behind Chucky Lozano, that Zendejas would have a much easier way into the Mexican national team than he would for the U.S. men's national team, where you have young players like Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, Gio Reyna, maybe Taylor Booth out there that are all vying for these positions. It might be a little bit more difficult to get into the U.S. team, but Zendejas says, I want that smoke. Let me have it. Let me get an opportunity to earn my spot. So I do think he'll be brought into this group. It's going to be real interesting to see how he fits into this group, if he's able to break in, and if he does, what kind of flexibility that adds to the rest of the team down the line. Does that mean we could potentially see a future where Tim Weah is filling in at that left back position as he is for his club team? Does that mean that Gio Reyna is more of a 10 or more of a midfielder or something like that? Are we able to move spots around if Zendejas is able to come in and set the floor for us in a way that maybe we didn't have in the past, where we were bringing in players like Paul Arriola and Jordan Morris to fill in these winger positions? I think the inclusion of Zendejas really builds depth to to an already strong position, gives us more flexibility, and just continues us on that path to leveling up as a national team. I think if you look at the World Cup, the real issue that we had was depth. We just didn't have the quality players to bring in whenever our top guys get tired. Zendejas is absolutely going to be a piece that is going to help add to the floor of our national team. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be a player that is playing at the highest levels of Champions League and things like that in the future, but certainly an exciting player to bring into the mix. Now, I also mentioned Taylor Booth, who's the player that I think previously to Zendejas announcing his citizenship or his national team intentions, Taylor Booth is one of the most exciting players in the U.S. men's national team world right now, at least when it comes to young prospects. He's had a really exciting start to the season over in the Eredivisie. He's a player that a lot of people are clamoring for to see what he could potentially look like for the national team. I think Zendejas and Taylor Booth and Gio Reyna and Brendan Aronson all fall into this group of players that could potentially play as midfielders or 10s or, wingers or whatever else. We don't really know what the future of the system is going to be for this national team, but we do have a lot of tweeners who can fit in these different spots. Taylor Booth would be a really interesting inclusion if maybe Christian Pulisic isn't brought into this camp. Christian Pulisic, who's fresh off of his injury and has freshly returned to Chelsea. Now, whenever it comes to the striker position, the song has been the same for an awfully long time. I think, if anything, the position is just murkier. I think there's 5 or 6 guys that you could make a pretty strong case for and against being included in this group. The 3 that I went with were Josh Sargent, Ricardo Pepi, and Daryl Dike. Josh Sargent was probably the most effective striker that we had during the World Cup. Ricardo Pepi is playing pretty well in the Eredivisie for Groningen. He's back to scoring goals, and I think he was just such an exciting prospect for us that I'd like to have him back in the mix just to see what he's up to right now. Daryl Dike, kind of the forgotten striker for the U.S. men's national team. He's just been out with injury for so long, but he's returned to the championship and he started scoring goals immediately. Daryl Dike offers a different type of player compared to Ricardo Pepi or Josh Sargent or really anybody else that we have, with his just extreme physicality. Now, you can also make a case for Jesus Ferreira, who is back scoring goals for FC Dallas. You can make a case for Brendan Vasquez, who got the goal in the January camp window and got a ton of goals last year and was a great target striker. Haji Wright was, he was kind of effective during the World Cup, and he's a player that a lot of fans kind of clamor for. And then last but not least, there's Jordan Pifok, who hasn't scored a ton of goals after his bright start to the Bundesliga season, but we know that he is a target man and a weapon in the air and offers probably as close to world-class heading ability of anybody that we have in the group outside of maybe Weston McKennie. So there is that upside to Jordan Pifok. Honestly, I pick a name out of the hat for those 6 names, and I think I would be okay with it. I think I do think that Josh Sargent should be there. I would love to see Ricardo Pepi there, but anybody else, I think you can make a pretty strong case for or against. So that's my list of 26 players with some reasons behind that and some contingency plans if players pick up, mysterious injuries right before they're set to release by their club teams. It's going to be a really interesting camp. Maybe not so much for what we see on the field, but maybe some of the stuff going on off the field. The U.S. is still embroiled in scandal. The U.S. is still missing all of their administrative pieces. There is some excitement that could potentially be involved with the inclusion of Alejandro Zendejas, maybe if Taylor Booth gets brought in as well. But I think the big story from this is just going to be continued fallout from the Reyna versus Berhalter showdown that is still continuing to play out in social media and has been the biggest talking point about the team since the World Cup, even during the World Cup. So that's how I see it all shaking out. I'm curious about your thoughts on the entire situation. How do you think Anthony Hudson will approach this roster? Do you think the top guys should be called in? Do you think it's important to see that chemistry be built with the top guys? Or do you think that what happens now is not going to have a big impact on what the team looks like 3 years from now? Let me know in the comments section. If you'd like the Yank Report in podcast form, you can get it anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. You hit the like button. If you want to directly support the channel, you can become a member. Members get access to badges. They get to see the videos before everybody else. And they support me directly. Shout out to the Tier 2 members: Manuel Oliveras, Matthew Doyle, Matthew Hanna, Michael Baker, Dan McVeigh, Mike Irish, Aaron M, 427 Motorsport LLC, and expats everywhere. Guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report brought to you by Bet Online.